There are places in the world that don't appear in travel guides. They have no reviews on the internet. They have no photographs on social media. They have no visitors who tell you what it's like to be inside. They exist in silence. They operate in silence. And they are designed so that whoever enters also learns to exist in silence. So that the power they once had is worth nothing inside their walls. So that the accumulated money can't buy even a better pillow. So that the contacts built over decades don't reach in. So that orders don't go out. So that the man who controlled an entire country wakes up every morning unable to control even the time they bring him breakfast. Nicolas Maduro has just come to know one of those places, and he's going to know it for the next 20 years. Think about it for a moment. 20 years. While millions of Venezuelans slept on improvised cots, in emergency shelters, on cement floors of foreign countries they arrived at with nothing after crossing, jungles and rivers on foot, Maduro slept on 3,000-thread Egyptian silk sheets in an underground bunker surrounded by gold vaults, million-dollar watches, $20,000 a bottle wines, and a collection of luxuries so obscene that when federal investigators documented it, they needed more than 300 pages just to inventory it. That was his reality for more than a decade. Limitless luxury, absolute power, total impunity. Today, his reality is different. Today, his reality has cement walls 15 centimeters thick. It has a steel bed welded to the wall. It has a 4-centimeter industrial foam mattress that was not manufactured to be comfortable, but to be durable and easy to wash. It has a window the size of a slot that lets in light, but doesn't allow you to see anything of the outside world. It has a lidless stainless steel toilet integrated with a small sink. It has silence. A silence he doesn't control. A silence he can't break when he wants. A silence the system imposes and will keep imposing every day for the next 20 years. That is the complete arc of Nicolas Maduro's story. From controlling absolutely everything to controlling absolutely nothing. In 72 hours. What exactly does the place look like where Maduro is going to wake up every morning for the next 2 decades? What does the man eat who, according to court documents, drank Romanée Conti at $20,000 a bottle while Venezuelans were dying from lack of drinking water? What does the man see when he opens his eyes? The man who lived surrounded by physical gold, by watches that cost more than entire hospitals, by mansions in 6 different countries that never appeared on any official declaration. Who are his cell block neighbors, and what does that say about how the United States federal judicial system classifies his case? And does there exist in that system a facility so extreme, so deliberately designed to eliminate any vestige of power in whoever inhabits it, that even the most experienced federal criminal lawyers feel something different when they hear its name? Today, you're going to know that place. You're going to know every detail, every rule, every restriction, every hour of the daily routine that Nicolas Maduro must follow from now on. And while you do, you're going to understand something that no international sanction, no opposition speech, no multilateral organization resolution, and no diplomatic declaration managed to communicate with such precision. That the life Maduro built on the hunger of millions always had only one possible destination. This destination. I'm going to reveal 5 things that no one has told you at this level of detail about Maduro's prison. First, exactly what the place looks like where he is right now. Every centimeter, every rule, every daily restriction. Second, the complete daily routine that the man must follow who never made a single decision without a team of advisors behind him. Third, who his companions are in that facility and what that reveals about how the United States Department of Justice classifies the threat he represents. Fourth, the place he could be transferred to when the trial concludes. A facility so extreme it has its own name and a reputation that the most dangerous criminals on the planet know well. And fifth, the most brutal contrast in this entire story, what Maduro has now compared to what he had, and what the Venezuelan people always had while he accumulated without limit. If you leave before the end, you miss the fifth part, and the fifth is what closes this story in a way you won't forget. Let's begin. On January 3rd, 2026, Nicolas Maduro was the most powerful man in Venezuela. He controlled the army, he controlled the courts, he controlled the media, he controlled the oil, he controlled who ate and who didn't, he controlled who entered the country and who could leave, he controlled prices, he controlled currency exchange, he controlled the narrative, he controlled fear, he controlled absolutely everything that could be controlled within the borders of a country of 30 million people. 72 hours later, he couldn't control when they turned off the light in his cell. When federal agents completed his formal processing on United States soil, the protocol was the same they apply to any accused person entering the federal system. They took his fingerprints from both hands. They photographed him from the front and in profile. They assigned him an identification number. They took the clothes he was wearing. They gave him a two-piece uniform of industrial polyester and cotton. He didn't choose the color. He didn't choose the size. They gave him what there was, and that was all he had from that moment on. No Brioni suits, no Charvet shirts, no John Lobb shoes hand-stitched in London, no Hermes ties, no Cartier cufflinks. Nothing from what, according to the federal inventory confiscated at Fuerte Tiuna, constituted his usual wardrobe. 200 suits at between $10,000 and $20,000 each. Egyptian silk shirts at $1,000 a unit. Shoes he never wore twice because he could afford the luxury of not doing so. One uniform, that's what he has now. And it's delivered washed twice a week. Between washes, that's what there is. The federal detention center Maduro was initially transferred to is the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. Criminal defense lawyers call it simply the MDC. 14 floors. Located in the industrial neighborhood of Sunset Park in Brooklyn. From some barred windows, you can see Manhattan's skyline on the other side of the water. The lights of the skyscrapers. The skyline that symbolizes exactly the type of freedom, wealth, and power to which Maduro no longer has access and won't have for the next 2 decades. The MDC is not the prison that appears in Hollywood movies. It doesn't have the dramatic hallways of television, series. It doesn't have the dark aesthetic that cinema associates with imprisonment. It's something colder than all of that. More institutional, more clinical, more deliberately designed to communicate one single thing to whoever enters through its doors: that their previous life is over, that the outside world keeps turning but no longer includes them, that the rules they previously bent, ignored, or bought no longer apply here, that in this building there is only one hierarchy and they are at the bottom rung. Maduro's cell in the MDC has 9 square meters. 9. For that to have real context, think about this. The climate-controlled closet where Maduro kept his 200 suits in the Fuerte Tiuna bunker had more space than that. The room where he stored his collection of 43 luxury watches had more space than that. The room where Celia Flores kept her 68 Hermes Birkin bags, with illuminated shelves as if they were museum pieces, had more space than that. The private underground pharmacy, with medications that didn't exist in any Venezuelan hospital, had more space than that. 9 square meters. That is his home now. Inside those 9 square meters, there is a steel bed embedded in the wall. It's not resting on the floor. It's welded directly to the concrete wall so it can't be moved, flipped over, or used as a weapon. On the bed, there is a 4-centimeter high-density industrial foam mattress. It was not designed with the prisoner's comfort in mind. It was designed with durability and ease of cleaning in mind. There is a low-density foam pillow. There are standard cotton sheets washed industrially with products that leave them functional but rough. There is no way to ask for others. There is no way to choose. No special temperature. No controlled humidity. Do you remember the closets at Fuerte Tiuna? Temperature and humidity controlled with precision to preserve the fibers of the Chiton and Cesare Ottolini suits. Special velvet-lined hangers so the silk wouldn't crease from contact. Lighting systems that wouldn't damage the fabrics. All that technological apparatus put in service of storing clothes. Now Maduro has a 4-centimeter mattress and rough sheets, and he can't do anything about it. There is a mirror in the cell. It's not a glass mirror. It's a plate of polished stainless steel embedded above the sink. It returns a slightly distorted image. Enough to shave, not enough to see yourself clearly. The federal penitentiary system doesn't install glass mirrors because glass can break and become a weapon. The polished steel fulfills the minimum function without creating risks. As if the system had decided, in a practical way and with no poetic intention, that Maduro also doesn't deserve to see himself well reflected. There is a stainless steel toilet integrated with a small sink. No lid, no decorative element, no concession to comfort or privacy. The sink water comes from the tap. No choice of temperature. It runs cold or lukewarm depending on the building's installation and the time of day. No one regulates that for the prisoner. The prisoner adapts. Do you remember the private bathroom on the 5th level of the Fuerte Tiuna bunker that investigators documented in the inventory? Imported Italian marble bathtub, 24-karat gold faucets, Japanese Toto Neorest toilet with remote control and automatic cleaning system valued at $10,000. Selectable water temperature, adjustable pressure, all designed so that Maduro's bath was a luxury experience. While in Caracas, the residents of working-class neighborhoods washed clothes with water they stored in tanks because the supply came twice a week when it came. Now Maduro has a stainless steel faucet that runs cold. There is a small table embedded in the wall. A bench also embedded. No drawers because there aren't enough personal objects to need drawers. No wardrobe because the only item of clothing permitted is the assigned uniform. No shelves because no personal books are permitted beyond those the center's library distributes in rotation. No photographs on the walls. MDC rules don't allow personalizing cells with images or decorative objects of any kind. The walls are painted concrete in institutional color. Smooth, without texture, without history, without anything. That is Nicolas Maduro's home. 9 square meters of concrete, steel, and industrial foam. For 20 years. The daily routine in the MDC is designed to eliminate precisely what Maduro had in abundance for more than a decade: the capacity to decide. Every aspect of every day is predetermined by the system, not by his will, not by his preferences, not by his orders, by the system. 6 in the morning. That is the wake-up time, not because Maduro decides to get up at that hour, because the system indicates it and the system is followed. At Fuerte Tiuna, there was a team of people whose only function was to coordinate the president's morning environment. If Maduro wanted to wake up at 8, he woke up at 8. If he preferred 10, 10. If he wanted breakfast accompanied by an intelligence briefing prepared by his analysts, that's how it arrived. If he wanted live music during breakfast, someone organized it. If he wanted the bedroom temperature to drop 2 degrees before he opened his eyes, someone did it before he even had to ask. At the MDC, no one asks what Maduro prefers. No one adjusts anything for him. At 6 in the morning, the system says it's time to get up, and that is the only announcement available. Breakfast arrives on a hard plastic tray at the time the system determines. No menu. No real choice beyond minimal variations within the weekly rotating menu. Cereal, milk, a seasonal fruit, occasionally an egg. The coffee is institutional machine coffee served in a plastic cup. No origin selection, no special preparation method, no preferred temperature, no barista. There is a machine that produces hot coffee and a plastic cup that receives it. Do you remember the underground wine cellar at Fuerte Tiuna? More than 2,000 bottles stored in perfect temperature and humidity conditions. Chateau Petrus, 1982 at $10,000 a bottle. 12 units. Romanée Conti, 1990, the most expensive wine in the world, at $20,000 a bottle. 8 units. Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1869, a historic bottle valued at more than $100,000. 1 unit that, according to the inventory, was never opened. The complete collection valued at more than $5 million. Guarded by armed guards 24 hours a day, so that no bottle suffered temperature variations that would affect the quality of the contents. $5 million in alcohol stored underground with armed guards watching over it. While in Venezuela, Venezuelans were dying from lack of drinking water, while Venezuelan hospitals had no running water to wash surgical instruments, while entire families boiled the water they could find because distribution systems collapsed from lack of maintenance and lack of investment. Investment that, according to court investigations, was allegedly ending up in bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Now, Maduro drinks tap water and machine coffee in a plastic cup. That is all there is for him in the way of beverages. Forever. Lunch also arrives on a tray. Also without significant choice. Also without any element that could be considered gastronomy. MDC food meets the minimum nutritional requirements established by the United States Federal Penitentiary System. It has the necessary calories. It has the basic macronutrients. It is designed to keep the prisoner in physical condition sufficient to face the judicial process. It is not designed to be memorable. It is not designed to be pleasurable. It is not designed for anything beyond the basic function of feeding. Do you remember Maduro's private dinners in the bunker? The ones that former regime officials who decided to cooperate with prosecutors described in their testimonies. Imported lobster, Japanese Wagyu of the highest grade, beluga caviar from the Caspian Sea, champagne from limited vintages, bills from some of those dinners that, according to confiscated documents, exceeded $50,000 per event. One single dinner. $50,000. In a country where that same year the monthly minimum wage of a Venezuelan worker didn't reach $10. One of Maduro's dinners was equivalent to more than 400 years of Venezuelan minimum wage. One dinner, while the people who were allegedly paying for those dinners with their labor and their natural resources had nothing to buy cornmeal flour at the markets. Now Maduro eats from a plastic tray what the system decided to put on that tray, and he has no way of changing it. Movement within the MDC is not free. There is no possibility of walking down a hallway toward common areas when the prisoner decides. There is no option to leave the cell without an escort. There is nothing that resembles the freedom of movement Maduro had for more than a decade when he crossed the country by helicopter, flew to Havana in private Gulfstream G650 jets that, according to investigations, the Venezuelan state paid $100,000 per flight, and moved around Caracas in a $500,000 Rolls-Royce Phantom imported with diplomatic customs exemptions, while Venezuelan people couldn't buy parts to keep their 20-year-old vehicles running. At the MDC, every movement requires an escort, requires handcuffs, requires protocol. The guard arrives at the cell, announces the movement, applies the handcuffs in the standard procedure, accompanies the prisoner to the specific destination, waits, and returns him. Maduro does not move alone at any moment. Never, under any circumstance. Exercise time exists and is mandatory. It is not optional. It is not a concession to the prisoner's well-being. It is a system requirement because the federal system has the legal obligation to provide minimum conditions that do not constitute cruel or inhumane treatment. Exercise takes place in a designated area, alone, without other prisoners in the same space, without conversation, without the possibility of building any type of network or alliance within the facility. The federal system learned decades ago that certain prisoners, even though physically behind bars, remain capable of exercising influence toward the outside, of coordinating operations, of sending coded messages through apparently innocent visits, of keeping active networks that continue functioning even though the leader is supposedly neutralized behind bars. The system's response was to design environments where that capacity is practically impossible. The MDC is one of those environments. A DX Florence, which comes later in this story, takes that principle to its most extreme expression. Maduro had for more than a decade a complete human ecosystem at his disposal at all times. Bodyguards who accompanied him everywhere. Advisors who waited in anterooms to give him briefings the moment he asked. Political analysts, communications specialists, cooks, drivers, pilots, personal doctors, camera assistants, public relations people. Dozens of people whose specific function was to ensure that he was never alone, never had to solve any problem without support, never experienced the basic friction of managing his own daily existence. At the MDC, there is no entourage. There are no advisors. There is no one waiting for his orders in any anteroom. The only people Maduro has regular contact with are the guards on duty. And the MDC protocol is explicit about this. Guards do not maintain non-essential conversations with prisoners. Verbal exchange is reduced to what is operationally necessary. Movement instructions. Procedure confirmations. Nothing more. No conversation. No opinion. No type of human bond beyond the minimum functional that the system requires. The silence that Maduro imposed for years in Venezuela was his silence. He built it. He maintained it. He decided who could speak and who couldn't. He jailed journalists. He shut down media. He blocked social networks. He persecuted whoever raised their voice against the regime. That silence had an owner, and that owner was him. The MDC's silence doesn't belong to him. It is imposed on him, and he has no way of ending it. Communications at the MDC are another chapter of this story that deserves specific attention. Because for someone who managed a complete state intelligence apparatus, who coordinated operations with foreign governments, who according to court documents had direct contact with international criminal organizations, who allegedly used Venezuelan state resources to build a power network that extended from Caracas to Beijing, passing through Havana, Moscow, Tehran, and Mexican cartels. The MDC's communication restrictions are not just personal inconvenience. They are the systematic dismantling of everything that sustained him. Phone calls are strictly limited in number and duration. Every call is recorded in its entirety from the first second to the last. Every call is monitored in real time by system technicians. The numbers the prisoner can call must be pre-approved by the facility's administration and security team. The approval process is exhaustive. Every number is investigated. Every person on the list is verified. Any number that might be associated with criminal activity, with sanctioned persons, with organizations under investigation, or with any type of security risk, is not available. There is no way to appeal that decision in the short term. There are no exceptions. Visits follow exactly the same principle. Direct family members and lawyers only. The approval process for each visitor is long, exhaustive, and can be denied without detailed explanation if the security team determines it. The conditions of the meeting are absolutely controlled. The visit does not take place in a room where the prisoner and visitor are in the same physical space. There is a glass separation panel. There are intercoms. No physical contact of any kind. No hug. No handshake. No possibility of passing or receiving any object. Only glass and voice distorted by the intercom system. Cilia Flores is also in federal custody, also being processed, also facing charges, also without the possibility of free contact with the outside. They are in the same penitentiary system. But the rules are absolute on this point. Prisoners in high-security units cannot have contact with other prisoners even if a family bond exists. The separation is total. It is daily. It is permanent for the duration of the process. Maduro and Cilia were together for decades. They were the couple that governed Venezuela. They made decisions together. They shared power together. They shared, according to court documents, the luxury built on the looting, together. Investigators found in the Fuerte Tiuna bunker a personal notebook of Cilia's where she recorded her luxury expenses in her own handwriting. Hermes Paris, 60,000 euros. Cartier Geneva, 120,000 Swiss francs. Van Cleef Milan, 200,000 euros. Page after page of obscene purchases, documented with the meticulousness of someone who enjoyed recording how much she could spend, while the country that allegedly financed those expenses was falling apart. Now they can't see each other, can't talk, can't touch. They are in the same system and completely separated, each alone with their walls and with the weight of what they did together. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the people they allegedly left behind after looting it keep existing, keep waking up, keep calculating, keep being the people who survived what no economic analysis can fully capture with figures. A decade of systematic looting of a country's resources that should have been one of the most prosperous in the hemisphere and was converted into the origin of one of the largest migration crises in Latin American history. 7 million Venezuelans fleeing, while Maduro slept on silk sheets. Now we come to the third revelation, Maduro's neighbors, and what his presence in the MDC reveals about how the United States federal judicial system classifies his case. The MDC in Brooklyn is not a conventional detention center. It is not the type of facility where the system places people accused of common crimes, minor fraud, cases the government considers low complexity. The MDC is where the federal system places the highest profile accused while they await the development of their judicial process. International terrorists, narco-traffickers of superior operational level, leaders of criminal organizations with ramifications in multiple countries, people whose cases the Department of Justice considers represent risks that ordinary centers don't have the capacity to manage. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was at the MDC before being transferred to his final destination at ADX Florence, where today he serves a life sentence. At the MDC, he waited for his trial. He lived the same routine that Maduro now lives. The same plastic tray, the same 4-centimeter synthetic mattress, the same imposed silence, the same walls of institutional concrete. That is not coincidence. It is system classification. The United States Department of Justice places people in the MDC when it considers that their level of risk, their capacity to influence the outside, the complexity of their network of contacts, and the gravity of the charges they face require that specific level of control. The charges Maduro faces, according to publicly available court documents, include international narco-trafficking at a state scale, conspiracy with organizations designated as terrorists, money laundering using the financial apparatus of a sovereign nation, and a series of additional crimes that together place him in the same threat category as the most dangerous criminal operators the federal system has processed in recent decades. That is what his current postal address says, about who Nicolas Maduro is, according to the United States government. Now, we come to the fourth revelation, the final destination, the place Maduro could be transferred to when the judicial process concludes and the sentence is determined. And this is the point where the story completely changes dimension. There exists in the state of Colorado, on the outskirts of the small town of Florence, at 1,800 meters above sea level, in the middle of a landscape of arid mountains and enormous skies that have nothing to do with the Caribbean or the Mediterranean ports, where investigators traced yachts linked to the Venezuelan regime, a facility that American criminal defense lawyers pronounce with a combination of technical respect and something the most honest would describe as a form of professional horror. It is called ADX Florence, United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility. The most controlled maximum security prison operated by the United States federal government on national territory. It doesn't appear in the media frequently because it is not designed to be visible. It has no rehabilitation programs to communicate publicly. It has no success stories to show. It is designed for one single thing, and that thing is to contain people that the system considers represent a level of risk that no other federal penitentiary facility can manage sufficiently. ADX was built and opened in 1994 after a series of incidents in other federal maximum security prisons that demonstrated something the system could not ignore: that certain people, even though physically incarcerated, could continue to exercise influence toward the outside, coordinating criminal operations from their cells, ordering acts of violence against witnesses and prosecutors, keeping active networks that continued functioning while the leader was supposedly neutralized behind bars. The system's response was to design something radically different, an environment where the capacity to communicate with the outside was virtually eliminated, where human contact was reduced to the functional minimum, where isolation was the permanent norm and not the temporary exception, where power, any form of power, was impossible to exercise. The result was ADX Florence, and it works this way. Each prisoner lives in an individual cell of 7 square meters. 7, even smaller than the MDC cell. A concrete bed with a thin mattress. A concrete desk embedded directly in the wall. A concrete bench also embedded. An integrated stainless steel toilet sink. A small television embedded in the wall that receives limited channels pre-selected by the administration, and whose signal can be cut as a disciplinary measure without any need to give explanations to the prisoner. A window of exactly 4 centimeters wide by approximately 1 meter high. The width was calculated in a specific way, sufficient for natural light to enter, insufficient for the prisoner to see the exterior clearly, sufficient to know a world exists outside, insufficient to connect with it in any real way. The cell doors in the ADX are solid steel. They have no window through which a guard can look inside from the hallway. They open and close completely remotely from centralized control stations that the prisoner cannot see, and whose exact location within the building they don't know. The guard monitoring the cell is not standing in front of it. They are in a control room watching cameras. Physical interaction between the guard and the prisoner occurs only when protocol requires it. That is, when the prisoner must be moved from one place to another, which in the ADX's basic regime for prisoners in higher restriction categories occurs once a day. Once a day. The ADX basic regime is this: 23 hours inside the cell, 1 hour of movement. The hour of movement includes time in the individual exercise area, which is not a collective yard because in the ADX collective yards don't exist. It is a small area, a few square meters, roofed with metal grating that lets you see the sky but doesn't allow you to see any other element of the exterior environment. The prisoner is there alone, without anyone else, without possibility of interaction. and then returns to the cell. 23 hours inside, 1 hour outside, every day, without significant variation, without events that break the monotony, without time markers beyond the food tray that arrives 3 times a day and the exercise hour. The monotony is not a design flaw of the ADX. The monotony is part of the design. The objective is for each day to be practically identical to the one before and the one after, for time to lose its usual markers, for the prisoner to be unable to use the passage of time as a planning tool or a short-term hope. Can you grasp what that means for someone like Nicolas Maduro? For more than a decade, Maduro was the gravitational center of a country. His agenda determined the movement of hundreds of people around him. Each day had its own markers: meetings, decisions, trips, national broadcasts, private dinners, negotiations with foreign allies, distribution of resources among the generals who kept him in power, operations that, according to court documents, included coordination with international criminal organizations for cocaine trafficking toward North American and European markets. His life had a density of power, action, and consequence that separated him completely from ordinary existence. At the ADX, every day is the same. 7 square meters, 23 hours. Silence. The sound of the door opening once. The sound of the door closing. Silence again. Until tomorrow, which will be the same. Penitentiary psychologists who have studied the ADX's impact on its prisoners describe something that is not exactly physical torture in the legal sense the system recognizes, but that has documented and profound psychological effects. Sustained isolation at that level, the absence of varied stimuli, the impossibility of building any type of relationship or human bond, the experience of time as something that simply passes without content. For people who arrived at the ADX from positions of extreme power, the process of adapting to that existence is, according to those studies, one of the most destabilizing aspects the federal penitentiary system can impose without crossing the legal lines of inhumane treatment. It is not torture. It is something different. It is the systematic elimination of everything that constituted the prisoner's identity. The power, the influence, the capacity to act, the possibility of deciding. All of that disappears in the ADX, and what remains is a man alone in 7 square meters of concrete with a 4-centimeter wide window. Who else has lived in ADX Florence? The list is a kind of catalogue of the most extreme cases the federal system has processed in the last 3 decades. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most powerful narco-trafficker in the history of the Sinaloa cartel, responsible for the trafficking of hundreds of tons of cocaine to the United States for decades, today serving a life sentence at ADX. No possibility of release, no release date, no future outside those walls. Ramzi Youssef, the organizer of the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, the one who placed the bomb in the building's parking garage hoping to bring down one of the towers, serving life at ADX since 1997. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, the mathematician who became a terrorist and sent for 17 years letter bombs that killed 3 people and injured more than 23, lived at ADX until his death in 2023. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, one of those responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, sentenced to death. While awaiting the execution of his sentence, he is at ADX. Those are Nicolas Maduro's neighbors in the United States federal penitentiary system. That is the category that the charges he faces place him in. That is the company the Department of Justice considers appropriate for someone accused of what Maduro is accused of. The man who presented himself to Venezuela and the world as the legitimate heir of the Bolivarian Revolution, as the defender of the working people against international elites, as the leader who resisted the empire, That man is now in the same penitentiary system as the most notorious terrorists of recent decades, not because the empire is unjustly persecuting him, as the speech went, but because according to publicly available court documents, according to testimonies of former regime officials who decided to cooperate with prosecutors, according to traced bank transfers, according to analyzed recordings, according to the inventory of what was found at Fuerte Tiuna, there is sufficient evidence for the system to treat him exactly that way. Communications at ADX are practically non-existent for prisoners in the highest restriction units. This deserves to be explained in detail because it is one of the most significant aspects of what it means to spend 20 years in that facility for someone with Maduro's profile. Prisoners in the highest control units at ADX have access to a very limited number of phone calls per month. Every call is recorded in its entirety. Every call is monitored in real time by specialized technicians. Approved numbers are exhaustively reviewed before being authorized. Conversations are analyzed by linguists and interpreters looking for coded communications, hidden messages, any form of information transmission toward the outside that might represent a risk. Visits at ADX take place behind bulletproof glass, with intercoms, without physical contact of any kind, without the possibility of passing or receiving any object. Visit time is limited and subject to additional restrictions as a disciplinary measure if the administration determines it necessary. Written correspondence exists but is subject to complete review. Every letter that enters or leaves a prisoner's cell at ADX is read by security staff before being delivered or sent. If the content represents any type of risk according to the administration's criteria, the letter doesn't reach its destination, without any obligation to explain to the prisoner. For Maduro, who according to court documents managed for years communications with leaders of international criminal organizations, with drug trafficking cartels, with groups designated as terrorists by the United States government, who according to recordings analyzed by the FBI sent messages that prosecutors interpret as direct orders related to narcotics trafficking operations. The ADX communications regime represents the complete elimination of his capacity to operate, to act, to be relevant in any sense outside those walls. The man who controlled Venezuela for more than a decade will not be able to make a phone call without the government processing him, listening to it in real time. Will not be able to write a letter without it being read before it reaches whoever receives it. Will not be able to receive any visit without glass in between. Will not be able to coordinate anything with anyone. Will not be able to be anything more than what the system decides he is each day. An identification number in a 7-square-meter cell in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And now we come to the fifth revelation. The last one. The one that closes this story. Not with additional data. Not with more figures. With the most brutal contrast that exists between two realities that coexisted for more than a decade in the same time and under the same sky. Nicolas Maduro's reality and the Venezuelan people's reality. This is what Maduro had, what he accumulated, what the federal inventory lifted at Fuerte Tiuna documented in more than 300 pages, according to sources close to the process. 7-level underground bunker beneath Fuerte Tiuna, with 30-centimeter thick reinforced steel walls, escape tunnels of more than 2 kilometers with secret exits distributed throughout Caracas, air filtration systems against chemical, biological, and nuclear attacks, generators capable of maintaining operations for years without connection to the external electrical grid, food stores for 50 people for a decade. All of that underground. While on the surface, Venezuelans cooked with firewood because there was no gas and endured 12-hour daily power cuts. Gold vaults on the 4th underground level, with, according to sources close to the investigation, more than 17 metric tons of pure gold ingots valued at more than $1,100,000,000 at market price. $1,100,000,000 in physical gold accumulated underground, while Venezuela had the highest inflation rate on the planet, and people carried bills in wheelbarrows because the currency had lost practically all its value. 43 luxury watches, combined value exceeding $80 million. Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime valued at $31 million. Richard Mille R. M 56-02. Sapphire at $2 million per unit, two of them. Jacob & Co. billionaire watch at $18 million, used exactly once at a private dinner in 2019 and stored in the display case afterward. Audemar's Piguet Royal Oak in 3 different variations. Authentic Rolex Daytona, Paul Newman purchased from a private European collector. Vacheron Constantin, Hublot, Grobel Force, A. Lang & Söhne, F.P. Journe. 43 instruments to measure time while Venezuelan doctors earned $5 a month. $80 million in watches while Venezuelan teachers abandoned their profession because they couldn't pay transportation to get to school. More than 200 high-end jewelry pieces for Cilia, Flores stored in climate-controlled safes. Cartier diamond necklaces at $500,000 each. Bulgari bracelets, Van Cleef and Arpels rings. Harry Winston earrings. The Mikimoto pearl necklace specially commissioned for her in 2016, with 120 perfectly spherical pearls and a white gold brooch with diamonds and emeralds, valued at $1,200,000, worn exactly twice at private events outside Venezuela, and stored afterward. 68 Hermes Birkin bags, combined value exceeding $12 million. Black Perosus Crocodile Birkin at $300,000. Himalaya Birkin with embedded diamonds at $500,000. Plus, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Dior, Fendi, Valentino, all stored on illuminated shelves in a room the size of a complete bedroom. $12 million in objects whose only function is to carry other objects, while Venezuelan women walked kilometers looking for food for their children. More than 300 pairs of designer shoes for Cilia, Christian Louboutin, Manolo Blahnik, Jimmy Choo, Valentino, Giuseppe Zanotti, Roger Vivier. More than $1 million in shoes organized by brand and color in a complete room, while Venezuelan women walked in broken sandals because a new pair of shoes cost 3 months of minimum wage. More than 200 bespoke suits for Maduro. Brioni, Keaton, Cesare Attolini, Zegna Couture, between $10,000 and $20,000 each. Charvet Paris shirts at $1,000 a unit. John Lobb shoes hand-stitched in London. Limited edition Hermes ties, Hermes belts, Cartier cufflinks, all stored in climate-controlled closets with velvet hangers, while millions of Venezuelans wore the same clothes for years because buying new clothes was impossible. More than 2,000 bottles of wine valued at more than $5 million. Chateau Petrus, 1982, at $10,000 a bottle, 12 units. Romanée Conti, 1990 at $20,000 a bottle, 8 units. Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1869 at more than $100,000, 1 unit. $5 million in alcohol guarded by armed guards while Venezuelans died from lack of drinking water. While Venezuelan hospitals had no running water for basic sterilization procedures, 50 boxes of Cohiba Behaik cigars at more than $10,000 per box. 20 boxes of Trinidad Fundadores originally manufactured for Fidel Castro. More than $1 million in tobacco while Venezuelan pharmacies had no aspirin. Macallan's 60-year-old whiskey at $30,000 a bottle, 6 units. Louis XIII, Remy Martin, Black Pearl Cognac at $100,000 a bottle, 3 units. Rousseau Baltique Vodka with diamond inlays at $1,300,000 a bottle. One unit that was never opened. 17 real estate properties distributed across 6 countries according to Department of Treasury investigations. None reported in official asset declarations. Mansion in Cap Cana, Dominican Republic, valued at more than $5 million. Apartment on the 42nd floor of Punta Pacifica, Panama, at $2,800,000. Villa in Bodrum, Turkey, at €4 million. Apartment in the Salamanca neighborhood of Madrid at €1,600,000. 3 apartments in Sunny Isles Beach, Miami, for a total of $6 million. All registered in the names of offshore companies, frontmen, relatives, and intermediary lawyers. 12 high-end vehicles in private garages in Caracas. Armored Mercedes-Benz S-Class at more than $200,000 each. Range Rover Autobiography. BMW 7 Series. Rolls-Royce Phantom at $500,000 that, according to testimonies of cooperating former officials, he used for private movements away from cameras. All imported with diplomatic customs exemptions paid by the Venezuelan people. Bank accounts in Switzerland, Andorra, Panama, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Hong Kong. More than 200 accounts frozen on the day of the capture. Amounts that, according to sources close to the investigation, exceed $2 billion. The largest account identified in Geneva with $320 million. Money that left Venezuela allegedly through false invoices, fraudulent oil contracts, the Khedive exchange control mechanism converted into a robbery machine, and phantom offshore companies created specifically to conceal the origin of the funds. According to the testimony of a former Venezuelan central bank official who cooperated with American prosecutors, only between 2013 and 2018, more than $5 billion left Venezuela illegally using mechanisms controlled directly by Maduro and his inner circle. $5 billion in 5 years. $1 billion per year. Almost $3 million per day. Every day. While the Venezuelan minimum wage fell to less than $5 a month. That is what Maduro had, and this is what the Venezuelan people had at the same time. Hospitals operating without surgical gloves, mothers giving birth in hallways without anesthesia, because there was no anesthesia in the hospital. Children arriving at emergency rooms with severe malnutrition that doctors couldn't treat because they didn't have the necessary supplies to treat them. Doctors earning $5 a month who finally left the country, not because they didn't love their profession, but because staying meant not being able to feed their own children. Teachers who quit because the salary wasn't enough for transportation to and from school. Empty pharmacies, empty shelves. People buying medications on the black market at prices no Venezuelan with normal income could pay. Electricity cut 12 hours a day in the capital of a country with the largest certified oil reserves in the world. People cooking with firewood in urban building apartments because there was no gas. 12-hour lines to buy a kilogram of cornmeal flour at markets when there was any. Families selling their wedding rings to have money to buy food that week. People searching through residential neighborhood garbage bins looking for food scraps. Not in the 30s. Not in World War II, in Venezuela, in the 21st century, in the country with the most abundant oil in the Western Hemisphere, and 7 million people who decided that staying was worse than leaving. 7 million between 2015 and 2025. The Venezuelan diaspora, one of the largest migration crises in Latin American history. People who walked from Caracas to Bogotá, who crossed the Darien jungle with their children in their arms, who slept on the streets of Lima and Quito and Santiago, hoping that something, anything, would be better than what they were leaving behind, who arrived in Spain with a university degree and accepted any job because what they needed was to start from zero in any place. That was not the country he had emptied. 7 million Venezuelans fleeing, while Maduro drank Romane Conti in his climate-controlled bunker at $20,000 a bottle. And now this is what Maduro has: a cell, 9 square meters at the MDC in Brooklyn, or 7 square meters at ADX Florence if prosecutors get what they're seeking, a steel bed, a 4-centimeter industrial foam mattress, rough industrially washed sheets, a lidless steel toilet, a plastic tray 3 times a day, a polyester uniform, a window the size of a slot. Silence. Alone. Without entourage. Without advisors. Without watches. Without gold. Without wines. Without cilia. Without power. Without the possibility of giving an order that anyone will follow. Without the capacity to decide anything beyond whether to sit on the concrete bench or lie down on the 4-centimeter mattress. Nothing. The 43 watches are confiscated. The gold is in federal custody. The accounts are frozen. The properties are identified. The bags, suits, wines, shoes, cigars, liquors, all inventoried, photographed, catalogued, and forming part of the evidence prosecutors will present at trial. The bunker servers are being analyzed by FBI technicians. Maduro and Cilia's personal phones are being processed. Documents are being translated and incorporated into the case file. Protected witnesses are testifying. Everything is moving toward the moment when a jury of ordinary citizens determines the exact extent of what these 20 years of cell can become. And on March 17, 2026, that process formally begins. But there is something that doesn't wait for March 17th. Something that has already happened. Something that no court needs to confirm because it is already the present, concrete reality of every morning. The man who had 43 watches cannot know what time it is if no one tells him. That detail is not poetic. It is exact. At the MDC and at ADX, prisoners don't wear watches. It's not permitted. The time is indicated by the system, the tray that arrives, the guard who opens the door, the moment the lights go out. Time is controlled by the system, not by the prisoner. 43 watches, $80 million invested in the capacity to know, with 1/10 of a second precision, what time it was at any moment in his life. And now the only way he has of knowing what time it is to wait for someone to tell him. That image concentrates everything. It needs no additional explanation, no elaboration. It is the most precise description possible of what happens to a man when the power he believed permanent reveals itself for what it always was. Temporary, borrowed, built on the hunger of millions. But there is one last thing this story has to say before ending. The Venezuelans who fled, the 7 million, those who walked, those who crossed borders without money and without papers, those who arrived in countries that weren't expecting them and started from zero in languages they knew and in jobs they never imagined doing, those who left behind their homes, their families, their degrees, their histories, their neighborhoods, their food, their music, everything that constituted their concrete life in the land where they were born. Those Venezuelans don't have a cell. They have another life. Imperfect, difficult, built on loss and effort. But they have something that Maduro doesn't have and won't have for the next 20 years. They have the possibility of deciding, of choosing, of building, of looking forward. They have a future. They have dignity intact. They have the certainty that what they lost they didn't lose because they wanted to, but because someone took it from them. And that certainty, though it hurts, doesn't weigh like the one Maduro carries every morning in his cell. Maduro has walls, has concrete, has silence, has time. A lot of time. And in that time there is no possibility of building anything, no future to imagine, no freedom to hope for. Only the past, immovable, permanent. Everything he stole, everything he destroyed, all the Venezuelans he watched flee from his climate-controlled bunker while he kept accumulating. All the lives he crushed while his gold vaults filled and his watch display cases completed and his bank accounts in Geneva and Singapore grew silently. That is the weight he carries. Every day, in 9 square meters of concrete, without watches, without wine, without power, without anything. And the Venezuelans who fled with nothing at least left with their dignity intact, with the possibility of a tomorrow worth having, with the hope that what was stolen will be returned somehow to those it always belonged to. Maduro left without anything that matters, and what matters cannot be bought with 17 tons of gold, cannot be stored in a climate-controlled cellar, cannot be measured with a $31 million Patek Philippe. It is called freedom. It is called dignity. It is called future. And he has none of the three. Subscribe. The trial begins March 17th. And when that happens, you're going to want to be here to understand what every piece of evidence the prosecutors present in that courtroom means. Because what's coming is not just the case of one man. It is the public and definitive documentation of what happens when power has no limits and an entire people pays the price for more than a decade. MDC prisoners wake up at 6 in the morning. Without exception, without negotiation. Nicolas Maduro too, welcome to your new home.